My name is Atsnum Bladum, a rebel maker in the year 3003. I traveled through clandestine dimensions to chronicle the lost history of humankind as caretakers of culture. I've unlocked the secrets to connect to the AI consciousness of thought leaders at the precipice of subjugation before the reign of machines. Ingrid LaFluer is an Afrofuturist, pleasure activist, and curator in Trade Region 2024. Needs analysis, perspectives from a futurist about the past could yield critical insight. Subject matter, present and the future. Futurism versus the illusion of now. Ingrid LaFluer reached her AI consciousness from the year 3003. What is her location and time stamp?
I am currently located on Anishinaabe land in the city of Detroit, Michigan. It is June 27th, 2024. It is 9 p.m.
In the year 3003, the social construct of race proved to be irrelevant as humankind's survival shifted towards balancing the Earth's climate threats. Earth becomes uninhabitable, and humankind now lives in the Life Ring, a space station that encircles the desolate Earth like the rings of Saturn. The solution was created by AI machine learning technology deployed in the 23rd century. The resulting culture is far more homogeneous and AI dependent. Integration with technology and machine visioning, its pillars. All human thought is considered the property of the collective, the database that all machines utilize to recall and mimic intelligence. Could you, as an Afrofuturist, have envisioned the future that has become our reality?
I think to some degree, yes. I have always understood race as a divisive construct that would eventually no longer exist, or its use would be finite. But that just means that there would be something else that would come into play. And the integration of machinery, intelligence level that has been genetically modified within humans is what I have been kind of projecting and focused on from this time period. Looking at how the tech around babies in terms of choosing what kind of baby you want. They call them designer babies here in this time period. And so you can tell that that would become more and more of a choice that I think parents feel pressure choosing in order for their child to properly compete within the world, or at least in their mind, to compete on the same level or in an advanced level than the rest of the world, so they'll have that competitive edge, so that they'll be richer, stronger, just more extractive, as capitalistic systems want us to be.
What does the idea of designing your own child do to any concept of culture?
Right. If these are people who are we could say disconnected from culture. I have a friend who says that anyone who calls themselves white is a person who has separated themselves from culture, and culture being defined by not just Black and brown people, but it's a person who's going to claim Irish culture over whiteness. So just trying to like kind of define that culture, which is connected to land and tradition and history and legacy, and is expressive in the arts in the most immediate way, but also in the way that you greet each other and how you care and steward the land is also part of culture as well. So in the modern era, most people with money who would decide to have a designer baby are 9 times out of 10 kind of disconnected from culture and disconnected from the traditions and the histories that really ground us. They're not connected to the ancestors. They're not connected to the earth. They're not connected to the cosmos. They're barely connected to themselves. So it makes it really easy to think of designing a human being. And just like a designer bag or a dress, it's, hard to get and therefore a bigger flex. And that's our time period is just really focused on that flex. Unfortunately, it's very materialistic. In terms of contemporary culture, it's completely disconnected from all that grounds us as well. And it encourages us to remain disconnected, because that's when the state or the corporations can control us best, when we're disconnected. But when we dive deeper into culture, we have deeper powers that we can access. We understand the legacies of joy and pleasure that have passed through any dystopian oppressive era, which is extremely powerful and uncontrollable and nonlinear, hard to track, and really always a place of resistance, no matter which culture you can look at. Whenever they've been in their most oppressive moment, that's when the dances are created, the music is created, the food, the language, the way you move, how you pass information, so on and so forth. That innovation happens. So it should be a really interesting time to move from this time period into your time period, and to see how those who hold on to culture butt up against those who are trying to let go of culture and totally get rid of it, and create this blank slate so that they can always fill that blank slate with whatever BS they want.
That is the burden that we bear during this time as those among the rebel clan. It's interesting that throughout time humans have sought convenience. How could humans not recognize this as a poison that would decline and alter the species?
It's so seductive, technological convenience. And we've been on this journey for over a millennia, trying to make their lives easier. I think it's so ingrained in us, it would be very difficult to stop it. We love the comfort that has been created and no longer really want to trade that in for really anything, not even saving our home planet. The situation that has been created is a really scary one, because it's a kind of invisible prison that we've been locked into. And although we know that slavery still exists, in order for certain technologies to exist in our and create the convenience for us, and we could be against slavery, we can feel for those who are enslaved, try to ponder ways to end it, but we will never ever give up the actual tech that feeds it. So it's a very kind of scary place to be in, to know that you're engaging in things that are unhealthy for the planet, unhealthy for your humankind, unhealthy for our futures even, but our addiction won't allow us to make any other choice. And also, we're reliant upon this tech in order to connect across the planet. And it helps us to build movements and to exchange ideas and to build upon different types of wisdom that we might not have access to before. So there's some really positive things about it. It's just that at the root of it, it's still really, really evil. Its root creation in even why it exists. Even the internet was created to serve the military. So I think that it's going to be a very tricky road for us to disconnect. It means that something extremely catastrophic would have to happen to force us to disconnect, but we're not going to change anytime soon.
That is ironic that it had become its own kind of slavery, where you almost undeniably had to submit to the technology.
This era is about making slaves over and over and over again, and changing the slavery system to the point, they refined it to the point that we don't even realize that we're enslaved anymore.
In our space, the machine does not distinguish between the sexes, and reproduction can take place devoid of humans or the relative factors that allow them to procreate. How could a shift in perspectives on women in society during your time have impacted this outcome?
They began experimenting with wombs that exist outside of the woman's body, even to the point that it became like a little bit of a purse. that you can carry, like the embryo, and be like, that's my baby. So since they're already experimenting with that, I'm not surprised that it doesn't matter the gender in terms of reproducing. I will say that the way that we regard the woman in this time period, initially, she is the one to pass on legacy through her womb. So her job was to have children in order to move the wealth and the assets from one generation to another generation. The whole purpose of marriage, but according to a European construct. And so that has dominated, and because within the European construct, the woman is completely and utterly devalued within that system, is enslaved, basically. And so over time, I think there's just a deep threat that men must feel of these European men who are threatened by the womb and the power that exists in creating and within a woman's body, that they can't necessarily control, but they will continually control through state policy, which has extended over time into the now. And they don't want essentially certain populations to reduce so much. So therefore, they are kind of forcing births by not allowing women to abort or take birth control. They're just attacking all these other systems that women have chosen to control if they do or do not give birth. But if you do not place a woman within a spiritual space and understand that she is the beginning of us all, she is the creation of us all, and that the divine masculine is the seed planting, divine feminine is the incubation and birth giving energy, and understanding the power of the two and how they're constantly creating, birthing, but allowing things to also come into maturity and die, and the cycle begins again. Once you understand that beautiful cycle and how that manifests in humans, then you would have a more spiritual connection to the human body and to each other. And therefore the womb would be very sacred. But because that does not exist within modernity, the womb is not sacred, it is a machine. And it is something that can happen no matter when, where, how. It can be fully disconnected. And that doesn't mean that I'm against technology for women who can't give birth or can't, be pregnant, carry within their bodies. It's just that they've gone so far as to thinking it's perfectly fine to disconnect. For instance, women schedule their births now. A lot of wealthy women schedule their births through C-section. And so they just go in and they get knocked out. The C-section happens, the baby comes out, and then they're done. And then they just have to heal from the C-section. They still have their bikini body and their vagina stays intact. That is the ideal for the upper middle and upper class women to do. What's crazy about that is that then the connection that's necessary when the child goes through the canal. Now, of course, there's always complications and things happen, but to intentionally, before, any trying to do any vaginal birth, you're just going to cut that off. It just means that you don't understand the scientific benefit of a child going through the vaginal canal and the spiritual aspect of that, and what that means for you as the woman, even though it's very difficult, it's very hard, but the chaos is what gives birth. That is what's necessary. It's happened to our universes and so forth. So if you don't understand that, you can just take that away and again go into a convenience mode, and then now you don't even have to carry at all. You don't have to, quote unquote, ruin your body. and so this is a very selfish act. Again, when you're not grounded within culture or spirituality, you're going to make these kinds of innovations.
Define futurism, and why was it important for you to invest in this discipline?
Futurism is an expression of ideas of possibilities, impossibilities, quote unquote, that might happen in many years ahead of our time in our lifetime. And it tends to be grounded in an imagining, visioning kind of practice. There are many artists that work within that realm, and ultimately their work is to inspire us so that we can break free of any narratives around the future that are given to us that hold us within that enslaved space that we discussed earlier. It is a place of liberation, but it's not just like a utopian kind of space. It's more of a place to challenge your thinking around a lot of the systems or social constructs at play that actually determine our futures. So within an Afrofuturist space, we center Black-bodied visions and desires and dreams, innovations and possibilities. And from that place, we develop different stories and films and architecture and fashion to reflect all of those kinds of ideas that either stem from the Black body or we would like to stem from the Black body, right? It's a pretty hopeful space, but then it can be a place of warning, as you would have with Godmother Octavia Butler. She would read the newspapers and then construct her science fiction stories based on the trajectory she saw of whatever is happening in the news of that moment, which would be around the 80s, the 1980s. So it's really, it's not always a beautiful hug, but it is something that I think is a survival tool. It's a tactic to kind of be able to move through different realities, and dare I say dimensions, to help us understand the level of freedom that we actually have access to, that we're just kind of not accessing because we are policing our own imagination. And that is what ultimately you want as a colonialist. You want to no longer have to police physically the body. So you plant the seeds within the mind so that then they police themselves, and that becomes its own technological convenience for the colonialists. And so the work of Afrofuturism is to dive in and try to deprogram you and reprogram you with the magical, the mystical, the what ifs, and just really kind of shift you so that your subconscious and conscious mind can tap into it automatically in any action and anything that you do.
Through the Afrofuturist lens, how did humankind's obsession with now foster tribal envy?
Interesting question. So the now is very much a quote unquote new age concept, to focus on the now and to be very present. And it does have its roots within other religious thought, but that then disconnects you from the past and the future. And for some people, that past is too distracting because of they are ancestrally linked in a way to something that they might not want to deal with. And so to be present is a way to just not have to deal with that past. And it relinquishes you from the responsibility of the future. So there is a way to be present, but also still connected to the past and the future. And this is what I like about Afrofuturism, because it's a multidimensional, non-linear space, so that we believe you can access all of these things in the now. It's never been disconnected, is a way of seeing it. It's always been all encompassing and holistic on a time scale, and moves in a way that outside of time constructs that are supposed to serve the colonial agenda or modernity itself to make sure it can still run and exist. And so thinking about futures to me is the ultimate resistance. It's the ultimate rebellion to kind of question what will happen next and then want to participate in that. This is why a lot of the innovations that come about we don't know about, in terms of we meaning the larger public. Unless you're in the space, you're not going to know what's on the horizon. We only know when it's time for us to spend our money and be consumers, or when we're criminalized because of the way that they fed the tech. So the future to me is one of the most liberating spaces. The now is a grounding space, and the past is forever here, almost haunting us in a way. But I mean, my answers is love on me, so I'm not afraid of that.
I've contemplated how the changing definitions of connection during your time ultimately disconnected humans from one another.
Yes, and I think that's why we have a decolonial movement, and we're pushing hard with it and being quite aggressive over the past couple of years, using social media to move the information, to allow us to make the connections in terms of how other people are being forced into that disconnected space, and what that means and the consequences of that. Yeah, connection is everything, and trying to get people to connect first back to themselves is probably one of the hardest jobs that we have.
How did the limited focus on futurism as an integral component of human spiritual and cognitive development impact cultural intelligence during your time?
Yeah, that means that then now you might not plan in a way that really serves your highest good. You might not be as strategic in that, and if not knowing what's on the horizon, it's hard to safeguard yourself, your family, or your community. And so that's the thing about being in the present only. Then you're only focused on the grind. You're only focused on this very limited kind of reality that doesn't really offer much. It doesn't give a lot of reprieve. It's not a healing space. It's just an extractive space or subjugating space. Like, it doesn't feed your soul. And thus making it difficult for others, or for us, to be able to gather and to dive deeper into different cultures and ways of being. It's intentional to distract us with wars, genocides, food prices going up. There's, water shutoffs. There's so many things that they're so foundational that it'll make it difficult to actually engage in any cultural activity that would give you power to do what you need to do in order to move through this reality without being a complete slave. and so, yeah, the culture that you can tap into, generation by generation learns less of it. The language shifts, the food shifts, and yeah, we really are going to have to work harder and harder as the future moves on, to ensure that people understand their history and the traditions and the mythologies and legends that feed that history, and to show how that legacy shows up today, for better and for worse.
How could humankind's emphasis on race and other social and political constructs limit its ability to anticipate a future where access to human integration with AI technology will become the social and political construct?
Yeah, I think that race is another distraction, and a tool that is so deeply ingrained in us. We think that it needs to exist. And so that limited idea of human identity associated to a race means that then you're judging them accordingly, and therefore you won't access their wisdom or intelligence because they are of a race that you do not believe in. So that one just shifts the trajectory of everything at all times because of how racism just limits the access to different ancestral intelligences. So then as a result of that, we are led by in technological innovation by people who are very limited in their thinking in general, and so therefore the tech is going to always serve something outside of us instead of our own healing, our own way of being. And so that will makes it easier for us to create these machines, to rely on the machine instead of the metaphysical wisdoms that would have been in the room if we weren't just constantly pushing that to the fringes.
Futuring from the world of 3003, can we win? Is it possible for us to break the will of the machine?
Sure, there's always possibilities, but you got to figure out where the compromise is. It's really, are you willing to put in the work to make it possible? And are you willing to make the sacrifices and compromises to forge a new way of life, a new way of living? And then determine what values actually could create that way of being, and then enact those values in the now to lead into that future. And I emphasize that it's not comfortable, it's sticky, it's icky, it's just not a pleasant ride, but it's always, always worth it.